multilateralism still works. Member states came together to look for solutions to the trade-related problems that we're seeing today. Second, inclusiveness. MSMEs and women's economic empowerment found themselves in the outcome declaration. This is major. And third, we made incredible progress on fishery subsidies. We were this close. I really saw countries from all walks of life, all developmental levels, come together to say we need to deliver on fishery subsidies negotiations for people and for planet.
Even though it was not the reform ministerial that we were expecting, I think there was some progress in a number of areas that do promise well also in the lead up to the MC13. So on the one hand, for instance, we had agreement on new disciplines on services domestic regulation. We had the renewal of the moratorium on e-commerce. We had the final text on the investment facilitation agreement. So this is obviously telling us that there was an advancement in a number of areas that were not necessarily to be taken for granted. And then, to me, an important point was the centrality of development in the outcome document. Of course, from an environmental point of view, it was an MC12 minus outcome document. Environment was not explicitly stated, but we could also argue that making development central could also be instrumental in the future work of the WTO to bring back in environmentally connotated issues.
At MC13, we had the first time that ministers actually came together and had a ministerial deliberation on sustainable development. So for me, I think that's a really big positive. We've never had this before at any ministerial conference. And if you look beyond the main negotiations happening at MC13, you will have found that there's lots of activities going on that were trade and environment related. In addition to the ministerial deliberation, we had 3 environmental initiatives by groups of members, and fairly large groups of members, actually bringing to the forefront ministerial statements on addressing plastics pollution, on the wide range of trade and environment sustainability challenges, as well as on fossil fuel subsidy reform. And you would have also found that at the sidelines of MC13, the Coalition of Trade Ministers for Climate also met. So actually, from my perspective, I saw a lot more happening on the environment at MC13 than I have seen in any other previous ministerial, actually. And on top of it, of course, there was disappointment that we didn't get to the conclusion of the fisheries subsidies agreement, but I understand that members were very, very close and that work is continuing. And so I think that's another sort of very important positive that we should think about, the momentum going forward from MC13. And lastly, if I could say on some other issues that may seem tangential to trade and environment, but I don't think they are. We had a ministerial declaration on technical barriers to trade. A large numbers of environmental regulations today are in that domain of technical regulations and standards, and that ministerial declaration put a focus on the need for greater regulatory cooperation and to use WTO as the instrument for such regulatory cooperation. So I think in the sum, we did not get as much as we wanted or we hoped that we would get, and I think that's probably a fair statement. But at the same time, we did get quite a lot of movement and activity on environment-related initiatives. And I think the main thing to say is that work is going to continue nevertheless at the WTO. So thank you.
I expect more countries are going to get involved because we're going to have more of a push from capitals, from our businesses, from our MSMEs, and from our civil society to tackle environmental and sustainability issues at the WTO. I also fully expect that we're going to try all we can to deliver on the fishery subsidies agreement before MC14. It is possible, and I think that you see a lot of members coalescing around that particular issue. And third, I expect you're going to see a lot more partnership between the WTO and other international organizations on issues of climate change, trade and sustainability, and environmental issues.
Some progress can be expected in different areas of the WTO work that has to do with trade and environmental sustainability. And I would like to raise, for instance, that environment was specifically mentioned in the work plan, future work plan of the TBT committee. And I think this is a very interesting news because it could lead to discussing within the TBT committees very controversial items that have already appeared in a number of other outlets, such as the TSD dialogue, such as, for instance, a principle to be applied with respect to the implementation of unilateral climate change, trade-based measures such as the UCBAM.
Civil society organizations, of course, play such an important role when we talk about trade and environment. And today there have been new developments where more space has been opened up for civil society organizations, particularly on 3 environmental initiatives. The ones that I've already mentioned on trade and environmental sustainability structured discussions, on dialogue on plastics pollution and fossil fuel subsidy reform. I think the role of civil society is to bring to the attention of trade policymakers actual evidence, actual thinking, and actual policies that can make a real difference to the trade and environment challenge. And I think this work has to be seen as a process. It doesn't begin and end at the ministerial conference. It is a daily work, if you like, of interacting with delegations in Geneva as well as in capitals. And in undertaking the type of dialogue and knowledge products that can help this work on trade and environment, and also to provide a lot of pedagogical information, if I can say. But at the end of the day, I think it's about pressure, because it's actually civil society organizations are the ones who are at the forefront, if I could put it that way, of basically pushing policymakers in the direction of greater environmental sustainability. So I think your voices are certainly what we do need to hear in the trade policy world. Thank you.
I think CSOs should be able to contribute raising awareness on the number of environmental sustainability related initiatives that are being pursued at the WTO. There are 3 initiatives in particular: the plastic initiative, the fossil fuel subsidy reform initiative, and the TSD dialogue. I think we should seek for more involvement at the level of this initiative. I think also to seek more transparency in the way these initiatives are developing, in order to contribute also to the foundational discussion on facts-based evidence that could be instrumental to building trust among different WTO delegations that contribute to this initiative.
So there are many areas where I think CSOs need to be more involved in the trade ecosystem here in Geneva. The first one is on plastics. The WTO is doing incredible work on trade and plastics pollution, and I think that CSOs need to be more involved there. The second is working with TESS on the Coalition of Trade Ministers on Climate. This is an incredibly important avenue of the work here in Geneva, and I think more CSOs need to be present there. The third is on carbon border adjustment issues, especially bringing in the aid for trade dimension. So we need CSOs to be advocates for incorporating development assistance in the transition around carbon border adjustment. And the fourth, we need CSOs to be more present on interdisciplinary and intersectional issues around climate change and women, climate change and youth, climate change and vulnerable populations, including in SIDS, LDCs, and small economies.